In this video, I'm going to show you how to do the invisible join as well as the invisible finish. As you can see, this join is still somewhat visible to the trained eye, but it is much better than the slip stitch join. The invisible finish, on the other hand, is much more invisible than the join. One thing to note about the invisible join is that it does have a right side and a wrong side, as is illustrated here with how visible it is on the wrong side. Something to note is that I like to finish my magic circles with a slip stitch join. You can use the invisible join, but I prefer using the slip stitch join for them. That being said, make sure you're working your first stitch of your next row into the right stitch, so the stitch after the one with the slip stitch in it. Work your row as your pattern states, or in this case the 2 single crochet in every stitch, like you would normally until you get to the end. In this case, there will be 12 stitches total in this round, but obviously that will change depending on what stitch you're using and whatnot. Now count your stitches and make sure that it's all hunky-dory. Now, to do the invisible join, what you're going to do is pull your loop out on your hook and then remove your hook from the loop. What we're going to be doing here is pulling this loop across the first stitch of your row and through the second stitch. It's going to be imitating the front loop of the first stitch. I'll show you with this yarn needle. So as you can see, this is the first stitch and this is the second stitch. So we're going to make sure that this loop is going across the first one into the second one. Now insert your hook from the back of your piece through to the front in the second stitch. Now we're going to take the loop that we've removed from our hook at first and we're going to hook it back over our hook. You're going to pull this loop through to the back of your work. And now you're going to pull it tight. Be sure that as you're doing this that you're leaving the bar in the front to be about the same length as the first stitch is wide. Now you're going to yarn over and pull it through to make something like a turn-in chain at the back of your work. Let's take a look at the bar that we've just created that goes over the first stitch. As you can see here, you can see the original stitch underneath. When you're working into this stitch, make sure you're catching both the bar we've created and the front loop of that stitch. I'll show you what I mean on the next round. Now we're going to reinsert our hook and then pull the loop tight. We're going to work our first stitch of the next row into the same stitch that we pulled the loop through before. You're now going to continue as your pattern states. In this case, it's single crochet 1 and then single crochet 2 in 1, and you repeat that a total of 6 times, but obviously your pattern could be different. So as I showed you before, we're going to want to make sure we catch both the bar we created from the invisible join last time, as well as the front loop of the stitch underneath. Here you can see that the bar is covering the front loop, so we scooch that out of the way. Here's the front loop of the stitch underneath. When you go to catch the front loop of the stitch as well as the bar, make sure you catch the front loop of the stitch before you catch the bar. Something to be aware of is that there is a loop in the back of the work that you do want to avoid catching, as it will make your stitch more bulky and obvious and your seam more visible. Something else to be aware of is that you don't want to catch both loops of your stitch underneath, because that will also make your stitch more bulky and thus make your seam more obvious. In order to make the last stitch of our row, we're going to insert our hook through the front loop of the stitch under the bar, while at the same time catching the bar of the join. Like I just showed you, you're going to insert your hook through the front loop and catch the bar, yarn under, pull it through, yarn over, and then pull it through to complete your stitch. You might notice that we have an extra gap between the first stitch and the last stitch. Because this row has an increase at the end, it doesn't matter, but for future rows where there isn't an increase at the end, it will matter, and I'll show you what to do for that. For now, just work your stitch as normal. Here we're going to do the invisible join all over again by inserting your hook through the back of the second stitch, pulling your loop through to the back, and then tightening it and completing a turning chain in the back. You will now continue your round as your pattern states. In this case, it will be single crochet all around. Now that we've reached the end of our row, we're ready to complete the final stitch while avoiding having a gap between the beginning and end of our row in our join. If we work the stitch normally like I've shown here, you'll notice there's the gap. We don't want that. Instead, what we'll do is we'll insert the hook like we normally would and yarn under and pull it through. However, this time we're going to rotate the hook handle towards us and force the stitch towards the first stitch. So we force it towards us, and then towards the stitch, sort of like I'm pulling it. You want to be a little forceful. You're going to yarn over and pull through both loops, all while forcing the stitch towards the first one. As you can see, that removes the gap. We're going to pull our loop out and complete the invisible join like we would otherwise. Complete a few more rounds of single crochet to get a little bit more practice in. Now that you've completed a few more rounds and are feeling a little more confident in your invisible join, you're ready for the invisible finish. You can either work your invisible finish with your crochet hook or a yarn needle. The first thing you're going to want to do is take your scissors and clip the end, leaving about 4 or 5 inches to work with. You'll now pull out the loop so that it's just the tail end. Now, similar to the invisible join, you're going to insert your hook from the back of the fabric on the second stitch from the beginning. You're going to pull your tail end, yarn over, and pull it through to the back. And then you're going to insert your hook through the back of the back loop of your last stitch. I'll show you one more time with my yarn needle. Use this back loop, you're going to come from the back. You're going to be imitating the look of a normal stitch on top of the first stitch of your row. So you come from the back, you yarn over, and you pull it through. You're going to want to pull on the tension a little to make sure it's the correct size and not too big or too tight. Now that that's adjusted properly, you're going to want to finish it off so that it's nice and secure. To do this, you're going to go to the wrong side, find a random loop that won't be visible from the front. I like taking this loop from the back personally, but it doesn't really matter. You'll insert your hook, then you'll yarn over with your tail end, pull it through, and now you'll yarn over again, pull it through like a chain, but this time you're going to pull your loop all the way out. Now you'll pull it tight, and you're good to just leave it if it's a amigurumi, or you can weave in ends, either way. If needs be, you can push around the loops a little bit to make sure that the front loop of the actual stitch is covered better. We've now completed our invisible finish, but now I'll show you how to do it with a yarn needle. Start by threading your yarn needle with the tail end that you clipped earlier. Push the needle from the front to the back through both loops of the second stitch of the row. Pull it taut. Now thread it through the back loop of the final stitch of this round, making sure that it comes out on the wrong side of your work. Once again, pull it taut so that it's the correct size of stitch. And now to finish off, we're going to catch a random loop in the back that isn't visible from the front. We're going to pull it through. But before pulling the loop tight, we're going to slip our needle back through to create a knot. We're going to then pull it tight. Your piece is now good to go, unless you plan on sewing it to another piece, in which case you're going to want to bring your thread to the front. To do this, you're going to want to find the stitch that you're covering with the invisible finish. Bring your thread through to the front, making sure to go underneath the front loop of the original stitch. Pull it through. And there you go. Now your piece is ready for sewing. Now you know how to do the invisible join as well as 2 methods for the invisible finish.